Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. This is all about Merrimac, and today we are very fortunate to have Kathleen Morenski join us. Thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure, thank you.
Today, Kathleen is going to talk about the Foreign Service, and she comes to us by way of her mom, who is Jerry Morenski, and she is the outreach worker for the coordinator for the Merrimac Senior Center. And I've known Kathy through her mom, and we thought this would be a great opportunity to find out a little bit more about what it means to be in the Foreign Service. Have you ever wondered what it's like? Are you interested in it? This is a great opportunity for us to get some idea about the kinds of things that the Foreign Service does, because I think a lot of us have absolutely no clue other than when you hear something on television about the diplomatic corps. Certainly what's happening currently, is in the news. So there's a lot more to it than just the big banners on TV. So I thank you so much for giving us your time and coming in.
Delighted.
When did you know that the Foreign Service would be something you wanted to consider?
I think I was a little bit unusual because I sort of felt it was what I wanted to do in high school. I was lucky in that my mother had a dear friend. Her name at the time was Harriet E. Lamb. She is now known as Ambassador Retired Harriet E. Lamb Thomas. Harriet was a Foreign Service officer. And my father had talked to me when I was a child about what diplomats do, because I had asked a curiosity question one day after watching the news. And I was interested in history, and I just became very interested in the idea of how do you get people to agree? How do you get nations to agree? And because I loved reading history as a child, a lot of what history is about is not just people, but how nations have gone along over time. So this was kind of always the benchmark against what I judged other things. And the other thing that attracted me is in the Foreign Service, you actually live in a country for anywhere from a year to up to maybe 4 years. Now, as anyone here knows, how many times have you been to visit the Constitution? Or you've been to Plymouth Plantation or to Benson's Wild Animal Farm? Do I hear a cheer? Yeah. And so there's a difference between when you go tour to a place and when you actually live in a place, what things you see, what things you do. And what attracted me was seeing the things that you see when you live there.
Yes.
So that's what drew me to the profession.
It's not like you're on a tourist trip and you hit the castles and
and you've got to bang off, go and see so many things in so many days, and you do see a lot, and we do that. But we also have the ability, I think, sometimes to see things or do things that are not necessarily what you see and do when you tour.
And really get to know the
right.
Not only the area that you're in, but the people, I would imagine.
Exactly. So that's, I think, what makes it a lot of fun. What I would say to folks out there who are thinking about this is it's not just the Foreign Service, which is what people think traditionally as the diplomatic corps. When people think, I think, what is a diplomat? They think of people who go out, meet with government officials. But we have parts of the Foreign Service itself which are different. We have the management section, which are the folks who run the embassy. And you try finding 100 copiers in one town when somebody big is coming. They work day to day on how to run things, personnel, and that's international personnel, because you're not just having the Americans who work for you, you're having the foreigners, the locals who work with you, who are an integral part of your workforce when you're in an embassy.
So there's all different kinds of people that are needed for.
Exactly. We need people who love computers, who want to be communication specialists. We need doctors and nurses who want to.
Thought of that.
One of the best folks I worked with in Mongolia, which was where I was recently stationed, was a retired emergency room doctor who he was doing this with his wife as their second career. They wanted to see the world. He was perfect for there because, kids come in, they've done things like they do in the States, like they fall off the countertop or something like that. And he's, okay, it's going to be fine. He's very calm and very good and very experienced with all kinds of stuff. So we need folks like that. And if somebody's thinking, well, do I really want to live abroad and what about my spouse and all that? There are other careers with the Department of State where you're based in Washington, say, but you're still traveling every now and then or more frequently because you're a specialist on something. I don't know everything there is to know about, say, nuclear arms, but there are people in the State Department who do. And those are the folks the diplomats in the field rely upon to help give the advice. If, say, a country wanted to establish an air agreement, which eventually allows them to fly to the United States or to code share with the U.S. There's a negotiation that has to go on about that. The economic officer in the embassy is not an air specialist. So what they would be doing is working with the specialists back in Washington. So it's when you think about international work with the government, there's a lot of different nuances to it, and people should not think, oh, I don't want to go abroad, I can't do this. There are a lot of different openings and possibilities.
You mentioned that you serve as an officer. I don't think people understand what that part of it is.
Okay, the U.S. Diplomatic Corps, the Foreign Service, is structured a bit like the military. In that, like the military, you are commissioned by the president eventually when you've proven you can't, blow up the embassy. Number two, you advance in grades and you're expected to serve a 20-year career span on average. Like the military, it's an up and out system. And like the military, to become a general, you have to ask for it, and then it's highly competitive. So for example, right now in the Foreign Service, I would be equivalent to a colonel. And when I'm on a military base, technically speaking, I should be treated as if I was ranked as a colonel. So
that is something I don't think I ever knew. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. And it must be a lot of hard work, just like if you were in the military, you have to do certain things in order to achieve that rank.
You do. We do not have calisthenics, nor are they often asking us to jump out of planes, thank goodness. But like when you're overseas, okay, when you're in an embassy, you really are a bit like a doctor. You're on call all the time. And for example, if you have to understand that at every minute you're representing the United States. Every minute you're outside of your front door, you're representing the United States. So for things like car accidents or things like that, you always have to have that in the back of your head. And that you also are representing 24/7. I've done receptions on weekends. I've worked all the way through weekends on occasion when you have a visitor. I have worked round the clock on negotiations on occasion. That's happened too. It's all part of it. It's part of the fun of it, is what I see. But you have to understand you're going to be doing that representation all the time.
So you have to keep that in the back of your mind.
Exactly. You don't necessarily can have, say, as honest a conversation. If, say, you had an auto accident here, you can have what I might call an honest conversation. Notice how I'm phrasing that? You can't have even that honest conversation. You just can't.
Okay.
You just can't.
Because you always have to be that face of
Right.
America.
You're that face of America, and you want to be the positive face of America. You want to have folks in foreign countries overcome the prejudices they have, and you're the primary means of doing that. Just like we have, I think, here some ideas of how the world works. Other folks have some ideas of how America works, and you have to explain that. I've had to explain that I'm not rich, I don't have an apartment like you see in Friends or Cheers or in American sitcoms. I had to explain a lot of things, and that's a lot what we do, and that's the great thing, because in turn you're getting explanations as well.
Do you find, you've been in many different countries, and do you find that people have an idea about America from the movies they've seen and television shows? Do you get a sense that that has colored their view of who we are?
It's more nuanced than that. It's also the news, the media, what's reported as well out to the world. But I think folks also what I've found in my career are two primary things. First of all, the majority of the world is very nice. 95% of the world is nice. It's helpful, it's kind, everyone just wants to get on, everyone likes weekends, babies, practical jokes, and having parties. There's a lot more in common between us than separates us. The second thing I've found is that people are eager to learn. And they enjoy when you can sit down and explain, well, no, it's not quite the way you see it in the movies. It's different. And you often say to folks, okay, if I was making a movie of your country, what would be in it? And they say, oh, this, that. And you say, okay, how often is that every day? Oh, that doesn't happen every day. And I said, you need to apply the same logic to some of our entertainment.
I can see why you're in the Foreign Service. You're very good at this.
Well, no, I think it matters. I think one of the big skills you need in this business is the ability to be somebody else, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and try to understand a bit what they're thinking, what they're dealing with, what they're facing. And then you always are truthful because your reputation relies on your ability to tell the truth. But you can say it in a way that helps connect with them. Okay? For example, education is a big one. I have seen so many people in so many countries, mothers are so concerned about the education of their children. That is their primary focus. That's what they really want to see. And they want to do the best possible for their kids in the particular country environment that they face. I think the United States has been very successful there in terms of higher education with our exchange programs, Fulbrights, for example, Humphrey scholarships, where I've met people who say things like, 20 years ago, I got to go to the US on a Fulbright. It changed my life. And then you learn what they're doing in their country to help their fellow citizens. And you can see the connection with that time in the United States. Maybe they saw the spirit of volunteerism we have here, and now they're teaching their countrymen how volunteerism works and setting up organizations to help children or the elderly or the disabled. That's where I see a huge impact.
How do the children or teenagers learn about these scholarships? How is that connected to the State Department?
Every single United States Embassy abroad has a web page, which can be accessed. Most embassies, I think all of them, have the web page both in English and in the local language, and those are advertised there. In addition, the officer who's usually in charge of this is called a public diplomacy officer. They will go out to the universities, to the colleges, to the high schools, and they will, and not just say in the capital, they will go out to the regions, and they will engage high school students and teachers and educators to make them aware of these programs. And that's a big part of what you're supposed to be doing. If, say, I was going out into say, Choibalsan in Mongolia on a trip, I would have asked my public diplomacy officer, what can I do for you while I'm out there? What do you want me to highlight? And I would certainly have spread the word about any programs we're doing.
I know there are certain things, obviously, that you can't touch on, but in the way that you can, what was a typical day in the life of you, for instance, in Mongolia or any other country?
Else? All right, well, I'm going to separate it real quick because in Mongolia, I was what's called the deputy chief of mission, and that's the person who's the second under the ambassador. Best way to describe it is if the ambassador is the captain of the boat, the deputy chief of mission is the first mate. So that job's a little different. But if I was, say, an economic officer, a typical day would be you would come in, you'd check what you're getting from Washington, we call it cable traffic, which are official reports, what other folks are saying, like anyone, you check your email.
Yep.
You check with your staff as to what's going on, has anything popped up overnight in the news and such. You normally do have a schedule, but depending on what that tells you, that might change a little. And then you're out there engaging with people. If you're an economic officer, maybe you're a bit like a reporter in a political or economic officer job. Maybe you're tracking down what the central bank is up to, or the banking sector, or the aviation sector, or assistance issues, depending on whether you have an assistance officer post or not. And usually you're reporting back to Washington by the end of the day. Not every day, but generally speaking, very few days go by where you're not sending something back to Washington to help educate them, bring them further to speed of what's going on and what does things look like in the country you're serving. That applies the same for political officers. Public diplomacy officers may be doing more outreach that day where they're bringing our messages, our programs out to the local population. Your management officer is running your embassy, dealing with personnel issues, making sure supplies are in, repairs, all sorts of things to keep you all functioning. Your consular officer is handling visas and immigration matters as well as American citizen issues, people who've lost their passport, people who've taken sick in the country, people who've perhaps gotten arrested. They're managing that aspect of the relations as well. So you can't say there's a typical day because you never know. Deputy Chief of Mission's a little bit different because you're overseeing a lot of this. So oftentimes you're either doing something a little bit at the upper level of this, where one of your officers says to you, okay, I've tried to persuade this person as much as possible, and now you kind of come in as sort of, all right, let's go one step up. Or you're dealing with the more thornier personnel issues, the more thornier management issues. It's part of your job. It's kind of like your mom sometimes when you're the Deputy Chief of Mission. You're a bit like Mom.
I can identify with that. I think a lot of people have seen the movie Argo.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know how that how do you feel about the movie?
How do I feel about Argo? Oh, well, the first thing I want to stress to people about Argo is this is a very atypical day.
Okay.
Highly, highly atypical day. When I was having surgery, my brother, who was a doctor at the time, said, all right, let's talk about if you did a movie or you did a television series on an embassy, what would you have happen? I'd say, oh, a coup, maybe a political unrest, blah, blah, blah. He said, now how often does that happen? It's not that often, you know, in the course of things. Some countries are very dangerous, as we know, but generally speaking, that's not the norm. So Argo is focusing on a very specific event. But I think in there, first of all, your heroes and heroines from the Foreign Service side were consular officers. These were folks who were dealing with visa issues, dealing with American citizen issues. So that can be a long, grinding day. These folks work incredibly hard. So many of us in the Foreign Service were very...
The worker bees.
Well, not so much the worker bees, because upper-level consular officers are incredibly versed in international law. Very impressive. But...
Do they hold law degrees?
Not necessarily. Some of them can, some of them can't. But they have been putting the law, the immigration law in practice for many, many years. But what was nice is they're often very hardworking, but when the average public thinks about what is a diplomat, what is a foreign service officer, a consular officer, they think about the political officer or the economic officer. So it was nice to see, and they were very valiant to see that recognized. But also, I think the curiosity you saw, the question asking a lot of them did, and the calm. The fact that, okay, the situation changed and you have to adapt, but you've got to remain calm, you've got to continue to think, and you've got to be prepared to adapt suddenly. And you've got to be prepared to make a sudden change and make a very split-second decision based on some good judgment. I think for me, one of the most interesting points in the movie, which I saw, was at the airport, where the mail office who had been a little skeptical suddenly jumped in and he drew the story. And that is very typical, is that sometimes you do have to make a split split-second decision, and it can be very nerve-wracking, but it is one of the challenges and fun parts of the career.
It also highlighted the Canadian
Yes.
diplomats, and I know from speaking with your mother that you are close with the other diplomats from the other countries.
Yes.
Can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure.
And how that works?
How that works? Well, it works kind of as if you were dealing in any profession, where if you had nurses at Brigham and Women's Hospital versus nurses at Mass General, in that you're dealing with very similar issues, and for you, a very similar environment. You're trying to persuade the country. You may not agree on all things. Some of you may be going this way, some of you may be going that way, but you're all doing the same type of business together. And so there's a lot of sympathy that way. And there's a lot of sympathy, I think, discussing among ourselves sometimes, how are things going? Because no one diplomatic mission can know everything that's going on. Now, there are limitations on all sides, but oftentimes if you're hearing rumors on the street or something, and your colleague can say, hey, did you hear about such and such? And you can compare notes. It gives you both a better picture of what's going on. Generally, yes, I've been very close to the various, usually European Canadian diplomats in all the posts I've served.
Which in Argo, obviously, the Canadians really took a huge leap to be able to
Yes.
Keep them safe and
Yes,
help
and,
them
and
get out.
the ambassador deserves a huge amount of credit. He truly, I think, was a hero for us in that regard, because they, even though Canada was, I think at that time, considered very neutral by Iran, he put him and his wife in a very life-threatening situation. And he did it because of the type of person I think the honorable type of person I think he was.
I think for me that was one of the most amazing things, you know, individual courage like that, and obviously his wife as well, you know, that they chose to do that. And I'm sure there are other circumstances where other diplomats have done the same in other countries, but since that's fresh on my mind, I bring that one
Not
up.
a problem, but I would also like to add, we should also think about, which we saw a little bit in Argo, that there have been local people, often very much because they don't have any diplomatic protection, who have over, say, the last 50, 60 years, done a great deal to help American diplomatic missions abroad, even the folks you're working with day to day. In some countries, it can be very disconcerting, if not downright you're under surveillance, to work for the American embassy. And
Dangerous even.
Dangerous when you have a change of regime such as you saw in Iran. So we should not at all discount that there have been many, many local workers at U.S. embassies who have done a great deal to help diplomats over time and remain helpful. I mean, even on simple things of where do I get my car repaired? Or you're going to an event and they're like, no, you're not. You are not going to this because it's just the wrong crowd. You know, there are certain things here which we know instinctively, certain types of folks go to certain events, certain types of folks don't go to those events, you stick out. And they're your local hires are your local knowledge specialists. And they're often best able to advise you on customs and how to talk to people, what the back history of someone is that you're going to be interacting with, what makes them happy, etc. All that's good stuff to know. And also how to prepare yourself to go somewhere in a tough climate or a tough environment so that you're as safe as possible.
What did you do to prepare yourself before you applied to go into the Foreign Service and Diplomatic Corps?
Sure. Well, first of all, the key thing that folks should know is the website is www.state.gov. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, there is a section on careers. The Foreign
We'll
Service.
make sure that that gets up for people, so they don't have to scramble for a
Pencil,
now.
that's great. Uh, It is still, I took it way at the dawn of time when we used quill pens, but it's still a written exam. Now you have a personal assessment, a personal essay, and an oral exam. And to prepare for the written exam, which I believe is sometime in early October this year, I was showing kind of 2 dates when I looked at it yesterday. It's kind of like Trivial Pursuit for diplomats. What we're looking for, I think, in the State Department are people who are well-rounded. You don't have to have gone to graduate school, okay? You don't have to have gone to college. You do have to have what I would consider a curiosity and be well-read, because oftentimes people are going to turn to you as the person most knowledgeable about American government, American history, American culture, American science. So the exam is not just looking at knowledge of, say, politics, economics, management issues. It's also looking at your knowledge, and now technology issues. It's also looking at your knowledge of American concepts and how broadly can you represent the United States.
Do they ask you questions, if you were in this situation, what would you do?
No, not in that environment. This is very much a fill in the circle test, or at
Okay.
least it was in my day. There may also be essay parts now. The personal statement is definitely an essay. When you get to the oral exam, that is where you would have those type of questions, where they're going to be seeing how, again, you behave when you're presented with tough situations, be it tough questions being asked you about American positions or politics, or tough situations where you've got a security element, how do you handle it, that sort of thing. And it's an all-day affair. It's very exhausting, but it's, I think, overall pretty good preparation.
And so you don't have to have gone to college, but you have to have knowledge at least of America and
Right.
history and
Right.
the love of learning,
Right.
love of people, because
Love of
you're going to
people.
be working with people.
Mhm.
Any
Curiosity,
other
I think is a good one. They do rank order you based a bit on your background. But I remember in my incoming class, which is 22 years ago, we had one person who had finished a doctorate, we had one person who was finishing up college, and we had one person who had been a spouse of an oil executive and took the exam on a bet.
No.
And she did very well. She had a very good career. So we have to represent America, otherwise we're not doing our job. So we have to be wide open in
All
recruitment.
different kinds of people from
Exactly.
different parts of life.
Exactly.
That's wonderful to know. So I could apply.
Sure, you could. We do have an age limit. I have to,
darn.
I'm sorry, like the military, but part of it is because when you come in, you are expected to be available for worldwide assignment. And that's something people have to realize. That's very important. Worldwide assignment means what it says. I have been sent to places where I didn't ask at first to go there. I've been sent to places where, yes, I put it on my list to go there, and it wasn't my top choice, and then I went there and had a wonderful time. I have been to my dream post, and it didn't quite turn out that way. So it's a very varied situation, but they do have the right to send you where they need you. So you have to be aware of that.
They look at your skills and decide based on your skills where you need to go at that time?
Not
or?
necessarily. A little bit. For example, if you already have language skills when you come in, if they need that language skill in that incoming batch, in the jobs that are open, most likely you will be assigned to that job.
Okay.
You do have some choice. The process is called bidding. You have some choice. There's a list of open jobs. You can look at them, and from that you formulate a bid list.
Okay.
Now, sometimes you have certain rules depending on what their staffing needs are, and those can change. But you put that in and this is in the lower, when you're first starting out, and then they will decide where they're going to send you. And when I first started out, I admit, I did not put the post I ended up at on my list. I put a bunch of other places. The reason I did it was it was unfurnished, and at the time I had very little things. I was living in a group house, and I thought to be a proper diplomat, I at least needed china, right? And when we got back from sort of a leadership team building offsite, my career advisor said, "Why didn't you bid Toronto?" And I said, "Because I have no things." She said, "Don't worry about it." She was absolutely right.
Okay.
Didn't need to worry about it.
So what are some of the countries that you've gone
Been to?
Yes.
I've served in Toronto, Canada, Paramaribo, Suriname, which is the former Dutch Guyana, upper coast of South America. I've served in St. Petersburg, Russia. I've served in Brussels, Belgium. And I most recently served in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. But I also served a number of Washington assignments in the Department of State in between all of those.
Do you have to do, if you're going to be assigned, as you said, you're going to be going to Poland next, do
Right.
you have to do anything to prepare when you're going to some of these places?
Yes, it depends. There are two sides to that. It depends on where you're being assigned. For example, this job comes with a language requirement, so I will spend this year learning intensive Polish, which is class all day long and homework, and they will try to get me to a strong fluency by this next summer. So sometimes you have to take, for example, for your first
With a name like Morenski, you don't speak it?
I know. This has raised eyebrows. It's very true. I know some things, and when I've been prepping ahead, because language learning is not my strong suit, I'm recalling certain, I'm going, oh yeah, I remember hearing that, or that sounds a little like Russian, but it'll be a tough slog, I'll admit. But there's those things. For example, consular officers going to the first consular tour will take a consular course, which will walk them through all the basics, and you will have as you go farther up, you will take other courses over time, like on leadership, management, etc. Then there's the, how do I get I and myself and my stuff and my car and my dog and my family organized to go to place X? There's no course for this. Over time, you learn certain skills, and then you're kind enough to pass them on to those coming in. Of look, mentoring of, you really have to start 6 months out, because a friend and I, when she was going to Warsaw and I was going to Brussels, we started a year early, in that we made a list of all the stuff we needed to get. You know, you pick up your towels and you go, yeah, I think it's time. My mother, does this pass the mom test? Nope. So then what we would do is we would go to certain sales over the course of the year, focused on those things we need, such as the white sale and such like that. At the same time, you have to come to grips with the fact that being a pack rat eventually costs you. You're only allowed a certain amount of pounds to be taken to certain posts, and that changes depending on the post. And so if you, like me, you love books, you have to lighten up on some other things. And so you can't squirrel everything, so you kind of have to start weeding through clothes and stuff you're giving away, just as you're doing a one-time move. But we do it more often, and it's healthy to do that.
Oh, I'm a reader as well, so I can understand that, you know, and I do have an e-reader, but it's not quite the same as having that book in your hand.
Book in your hand, and also when you think, for example, Mongolia, it's very, very cold in the winter. Your high can be minus 20 Fahrenheit during the day, go down to minus 40 at night. So sometimes you are not necessarily going outside. So having that library you haven't read yet as a resource is a wonderful thing to relax.
Yeah.
But it's weight, it costs you, so to speak.
Well, I'd like to just touch on just a few fun things
Okay.
that maybe you can share.
Sure.
What kind of fun things can you share with us that you have experienced in your travels?
In my travels. Okay, flying in very small Cressida plane over the rainforest, and then down into the rainforest, and taking also boating along parts in the rainforest, along parts of the Korenine River in Suriname, where you see all kinds of nature you aren't going to see anywhere else. Suriname has what's a blue toad. It's as bright as blue as the light blue on your dress. It's very hard to see them. We saw one, for instance.
Is it poisonous?
No.
Oh,
No.
good.
It's,
Because a lot of those are.
If I recall, it isn't. Other fun thing is you do get over your bug rodent issues because here you might have a tiny, tiny cockroach, but there are some countries where you have not so tiny cockroach or banana spiders. Okay.
No way.
Yeah, way. I had touchdown with my DCM at the time. We were in the interior.
DCM is.
I'm sorry, Deputy Chief of Mission,
Yeah.
one behind the ambassador. And we were going to visit the Grand Man, or the tribal chief, in the interior to find out how things were going there. Were they getting services from the government, how they were perceiving things. And we were waiting to meet with our guides to then walk to the village. And I turned and went to put my hand on a tree, and I looked again, and there is this banana spider minding her own business. She's a big sucker, and I said, "Your tree." "Okay, that's your tree. I will find another tree."
Oh, I don't think I'd be that calm, I have to say.
Camel riding.
Camel riding.
Okay, I did that this past summer. It's not good to realize that the first time you've ever been on an animal requiring stirrups other than the horse on the merry-go-round is when the camel gets up. But it was fine. Had a lovely time on the camel. Worked very well.
One hump or two?
It was a two-hump camel. I was holding on to the hump. He was being led by the camel in front of me. My best friend was on that.
Yeah.
What else? I've dog sledded.
Oh, dog sledding.
I've mushed. That was also in Mongolia. A guy set up a dog sledding business.
Wow.
And my friend Fiona got into the one he was driving. He said, "Just put your foot on the brake. I'll be there in a minute." And I'm thinking, okay, and the other driver will come back. And they said, "Okay, let go." I let go, and all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, I'm going to be driving this thing. And you kind of just say, okay, it's a situation, I will manage it. And I did. I did. It was fun
How
and
many
fun.
dogs were in the...
I think there were 8. All very nice. They knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
They just
Thank goodness.
yes, they just had this dumb human on the back who didn't quite understand.
So he set up this dog sledding for
taking
taking...
Mongolians or anyone who was interested. I
Just
guess
for fun.
Just for fun.
Okay.
And that's another thing you see abroad, which I'm not sure gets captured. People are creative. People are entrepreneurial. They really are. Give them a chance. They will want to support themselves and make something happen.
Mm-hmm. So you've seen the best in the countries that you've been to.
Right.
Which is just a fabulous opportunity. What would you say is like perhaps the biggest highlight? Do you have one that you can pick?
Of sort of the best.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is not going to sound like a highlight, but I was in St. Petersburg, Russia on 9/11. And there was such an outpouring of compassion and concern from average Russian citizens.
Mm.
Our consulate at the time was in a 19th century building. The windows for the first floor were about 6 feet up, and it was about as big as Merrimac Town Hall across. You have to imagine that the flowers, the icons, came up to those windows and covered the whole front of the consulate. And these were people who, at that time, Russia was still coming out of the economic crisis. For some of the elderly or such on fixed incomes, the decision to bring us a flower or an icon, that might have been a family icon, or they may have had to choose between food and a flower for us. one of our staff had the wonderful idea of returning the compliment of we placed all the flowers in the Leningrad cemetery, which honors the victims of the siege of Leningrad.
Oh,
But
Gives me
I was
goosebumps.
stopped, for instance, that day by waiters and waitresses. I had an official event I had to do, and we were going to keep going, I guess is the best way to say it. And they said, "Are you from the U.S. consulate?" I said, "Yes, I am." They said, "Who can we contribute money to?" Waiters and waitresses in Russia at that time did not earn a lot of money. We had veterans groups coming to us saying, "How do we give blood and send it to victims in America?" That was, I think, one of the finest things. It was a terrible day. It was a terrible time. But at the same time, you saw how the average person, as I said, there's more uniting us than dividing us.
Oh, that's a beautiful, beautiful story, and I thank you for sharing that with us, because it's not something I would have expected, you know.
It was incredible to see. And it kept up and up. I think I got this story from one of my our staff members, Sveta. She was the management officer's secretary.
Mhm.
And she was pretty, down to earth, common sense, a little tough. But she said this was the story that made her cry. There was an old gentleman who was the telegram courier, and he would come over to deliver telegrams of sympathy that people were sending in. And he would come every time he had one. And he was very elderly. And so Sveta, trying to save him some, stress, said, "Listen, why don't you wait till you have a group of them and bring it over? That's fine, we don't mind." He said, "No, I will not. You need to know every time we have this, because this is not just your tragedy, it's a world tragedy, and I will deliver every telegram the minute I get it."
That's amazing.
So that's the sort of thing you saw.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't think of another question that would top that one. And
So-
I just, I thank you for sharing that with us. I don't think that's something anybody can hear enough, that we are united in spite of some of the politics that may occur. And, when you get down to the real person,
Mhm.
we are probably more alike than we give ourselves credit for. And
I think so. I
Yeah.
think so. I realize there's a lot of strife. I know I listed the posts I've been in. I've not served at what many people would call dangerous posts.
Mhm.
But I do think that the world actually is a compassionate place, and I think we have to work to rise above the negative, the hatred, and people who do believe in doing the right thing. We need to support each other. We need to be strong about that.
Mhm. Thank you so much for joining
Well,
us.
thank you
and
having me,
I hope
Laura.
to have you back at another
Sure.
time.
I'd be
and,
delighted.
Maybe if anybody has questions,
Oh,
we
absolutely.
can
Please.
address them to
I'd
you.
look forward
and
to
we'll
that.
make sure that it gets up on the station, so they can go into the State Department if they have any other questions.
Sure, I'd welcome
But
that.
Thank you
so much, Cheryl. I appreciate
you
it.
joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.